That's the big story right here on the BDTV Breakfast Show. My name is Elizabeth Musa. Nigeria is moving to boost power supply through clean energy. The federal government, alongside several state governments, has signed renewable energy agreements worth $435 million with private investors and partners. The deals announced at the Nigeria Renewable Energy Innovation Forum in Abuja aim to expand access to electricity, drive local production of solar and battery technology, and create over 1,500 jobs nationwide. Vice President Kashim Shettima said the move positions Nigeria to lead Africa's renewable energy manufacturing, with investment already targeting solar panel assembly, smart meters, and recycling plants across Lagos, Ogun, Akwa Ibom, Kano, Bayelsa, and the FCT. Joining me now to discuss what this means for the country's energy future is Cyrus Ademola, Managing Editor of Energy in Africa. Good morning, Cyrus. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me.
It's very lovely to have you here this morning. Cyrus, this announcement actually has generated excitement across the energy space. Tell us, just because you cover this beat and you have the better understanding of it, how significant is this $435 million investment for Nigeria's power sector?
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you again for having me. I think it's very significant to the renewable energy space in the country. Nigeria, it's also part of the renewable energy transition and towards its energy mix. So having a $400 million investment pledge, it's a very big feat for the government, and a very big fit for the renewable energy player in the industry, because now we're talking about a huge investment that is, I think, unprecedented in the space. Nigeria has not had such huge investment pledge, in the sector, and I think it's going to it's a move in the right direction, and it's going to help kick off the sector itself, which really needs capital.
The immediate changes or benefits that Nigerians should expect to see from these agreements?
Well, not necessarily immediate changes, but one of these investments do is to help drive liquidity, help drive capital. You mentioned something about excitement, help drive investors' interest in the space, because investors follow the money, they follow where the profit margin is, they follow where the policies are, where the investment are. So it may not be an immediate change, but what it speaks to investors, what it signals to investors across the value chain is that, okay, Nigeria has a huge potential in the renewable space, and people can come in and create jobs and build assembly plants and expand the value chain in terms of logistics and other aspects of renewable. So I won't say that it may have a immediate impact, but like I said, it indicates that the government is very much aware of renewable, particularly solar, in the energy mix of the country's electricity development, which is very vital to economic growth, economic development. So it may not be immediate, but you're going to see much investors' interest. You're going to see much people partnering and collaborating with the government to tap and leverage on the pledge capital to ensure expansion in the renewable energy space and take off. So yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction, but like most renewable energy projects are long-term based. You have to have importation of solar panels, you have to have assembly plants, you have to install solar grid across different places, and those things take time. So while it may not be immediate, but it's a positive step in the right direction that in the nearest future, there will be a lot of interest in that space.
Right. And Cyrus, we've seen that several states have signed individual renewable projects. Do you think that coordination across states will make or break the success of this plan?
Yeah, so different states have different electricity need and different energy demand. So what that means is that states have different paces and different interests, right? So some states, for example, have a low grid energy consumption. If, for example, look at states in the northern part of the country, there's a low grid energy consumption in those places, like Yobe, like Jigawa, like other places, other northeast, north central, northeast, northwest state, and some other places. Like if you look at urban areas where there's huge industrial activities like Lagos, like Abuja, like Port Harcourt, there's a high grid energy consumption. So they take a lot of electricity from the national grid. What that means is that people have different diverse energy consumption and different need for energy mix. So for the renewable aspect, which is what we're talking about today, I feel like if there's a coordination, it's going to be within the context of their need. For example, if you look at Lagos now, most of the energy consumption is not driven by individual consumption, rather industrial consumption of factories, manufacturing plants, and things like that. The same thing if you look at Ogun State, Port Harcourt, Abuja, and other places like that where there's a huge economic activities. On the other hand, some other states in Nigeria do not have such high energy need. So they may not require large investment. Not that they don't require it, but in terms of consumption to payment, consumption to cost, they may not require that much investment like those other places. So what you have in those cases, like you have mini grids, right? You have mini solar grids, mini panels that are targeted at schools, at facilities, at hospitals, at individual homes and things like that, because many of them may not even have the ability to pay for high electricity costs if such huge investment are there. So back to the issue of coordination, I feel like states are going to run in their own paces, right? And depending on the energy need and energy consumption of each state, that's what's going to determine, how much coordination is going to be between those states. So a Lagos, Ogun State, renewable energy cluster, for example, that maybe it's powering industries in, let's say, Ogun industrial clusters or Lagos industrial cluster may require much, investment, much capital, and much cost than in other places like, say, Jigawa or Yobe. So those kind of diversity or disparity will definitely be at play when I'm talking about coordination. So each state or each region or each places will determine, how they're going to address coordination based on the energy consumption and based on their larger electricity market.
President actually talked about building the renewable energy supply chain. In his words, he said, right here at home. How realistic is that vision, and what kind of policy support will we be requiring rather?
Okay, good one. I think the renewable energy is still at the frontier stage. It's still emerging. There's still room for a lot of possibilities. There's still room for a lot of investment. It's still a very little part of our energy mix. I don't think it's up to 20%, about maybe 7 to 10%. While except we're talking about ideal power, which some people may not consider as part of what we're talking about today. But we're talking about solar. It's still very, very little, and it's not a huge chunk of our industrial electricity consumption. But the value chain has always been there. There's manufacturing plants in Nigeria. There is people creating solar. There are people who are into logistics. There are people into B2B businesses for supplying electricity or supplying solar panel to companies, to banks, to hospitals. All of those things are present. But I think what the vice president might be talking about is a centralized form of value chain that will require some kind of government involvement in every segment of electricity or renewable energy distribution. Well, I don't know how that will work out in practice, but what I would advise is a more commitment to investing in those value chains that have already existed. And in terms of policy, right, we already have a Nigerian first policy in our electricity sector. We now have devolution of regulatory oversight across states in Nigeria that is primarily driven by NEC. And we also have the Electricity Act in Nigeria that determine how states generate and distribute power. So all of those things are in place. What we need is a consolidation of them, a collaboration with the private sector, because when you talk about electricity in general, what you're talking about is capital. Without capital, there is no room for development. There's no room for growth. So if the government wants to come in and disrupt or help drive growth in the value chain, that means that the government has to create policies and climate that drive investment in those areas that I talked about. So, but I don't think there should be too much involvement of government in all of those value chains, because each of them have different markets and each of them have different incentives. So they have different things that drive them. Logistics, for example, B2B retails, for example, manufacturing plant, for example, assembly plant, for example, all of those things, importation of solar panels, for example, all of those things have different incentives. So how can the government come in will be create an environment where there is capital inflow and capital retention to drive growth, because anything has to do with electricity costs a lot of money, and anybody that's in the field will tell you that.
Always seen in the past, we've seen concerns about policy instability. With this drive, do you think that we might in some way see some strengthening investor confidence in Nigeria's energy market?
Yeah, to be fair to what the government is doing, there's been a renewed confidence in the market in terms of electricity. You see what's happening with the state, creating their own electricity market. Some of them also having renewable as part of their energy mix. Some of them, trying to create their own power plant that may not really require the national grid. Like in the case of Abia State, where there is an integrated power plant where you have a generation and distribution. So here, I think there's been a renewed interest in investors' confidence because of the electricity act that has been passed, whereby people cannot see how defined, how unified the system is, and people realize that there can be a level playing field. But going forward, in terms of policy flip-flop, which is one of the issues that we may have, I think there's a new electricity bill that has been considered in the National Assembly that may unwind some of the things that have been stipulated in the previous one. I feel like that may not be necessary, but in terms of investors' confidence, based on people I've spoken with, based on my own observation, based on even data out there, there'll be more revenue collection in the electricity market. There's increase in investment. Recently, the federal government issued a 4 trillion naira bond, to help pay off certain bills to the GenScos. All of these things are investor confidence, but policies must be given time to mature. Policies must be given time to grow. Policies must be given time to be solidified. You can't just keep changing the goalposts and expect people to not take their capital elsewhere. So for me, my advocacy would be let the Electricity Act, let it stay put for a while, maybe 5-10 years, and see how it help resolve some of these challenges, and then ensure that you are not coming in as the referee and trying to change the rule of the game every now and then. But in terms of confidence, I think we are heading in the right direction to an extent, but the important thing would be to maintain that momentum so that there will not be capital flight. That would be my position.
All right, and Cyrus, let's take away the focus just a bit from, solar and battery production. Are there other renewable sources that Nigeria should be exploring more aggressively?
Yeah, so like I said, renewable is a frontier market in Nigeria. Gladly, there's a lot of interest from players. There's a lot of interest from international financiers, like the World Bank, the AFDB, and others like that who are interested in funding renewable. It's going to be a part of our energy mix, in the future. But in terms of other alternatives, right, that can be explored. When it comes to electricity, one of the things that drive it is your climate. So how indigenous is this electricity generative supply to your climate? If you take South Africa, for example, which is one of the places we cover, in Energy Africa, is that they have a huge coal resource. So a lot of electricity comes from coal. In Nigeria, a lot of electricity comes from gas, right? Because we have huge gas quantity. So we have a lot of gas. And then there's hydropower. Hydropower is considered to some extent a form of renewable energy. So if you are talking about alternative, hydropower will definitely be one of the drivers of electricity mix in Nigeria. We have like 4 main hydropower. We have like 20 of them in different places. We have 2 of them in Niger State. I think the Jeddah, the Kanji, the Shiroro, and the Zure group hydropower. So hydropower requires huge capital, long-time investment. But the good part of it, or the important part of it, is that it can help drive huge scale industrialization, right? So when you have hydropower, it's situated in a place, with engineers and with, people who facilitate it, but it can help drive huge industrialization. And if anybody ask you today, they will tell you that what Nigeria urgently need is industrialization. Electricity is not just for consumption alone. It's not just to plug your devices or put on your freezer. It is to drive growth. It's to drive general economic development in the country. So hydropower comes to play in that area. And there are certain other areas, for example, in the north, where there's a huge landmass where you can have huge facility for wind energy. It's being considered, but I don't think it has the same momentum as solar, but because of cost and government commitment not being enhanced in that area, not being present in that area. But as of today, I would say that when it comes to alternative, and we've been doing it, we are doing it, but we need more of that, to help drive that. That would be hydropower, as a form of renewable energy source. Then there's other also that we can talk about, but I think biomass, for example, but it's not really that. I don't think there is the climate for it in this part of the world in terms of large quantity. Some people have advocated for nuclear power plant. There was a time that Nigeria was considering having a collaboration with the Russians to build nuclear power plant in Nigeria. Right? Nuclear power plant is not a renewable energy, but it does not cause any form of emission. Right. So it's a good thing to consider. But like I said, electricity has to do with capital. And if there's no climate for capital, you can hardly, see much investment. What has been happening over the years is that the Nigerian sector has been deprived of huge capital. There are reports that say that Nigeria requires about $2 billion, yearly to even scale up its electricity market. So hydropower will be my go-to, but there are other alternatives like biomass, like nuclear plant, which is not renewable, but I think it should also be considered if you're talking about industrialization.
Oh, Sarah, you mentioned something that I think is really important. You said that electricity is highly dependent on capital, and I agree with you. So how do we actually ensure that this project don't just, remain on paper, but actually translate into power for the ordinary homes, the small businesses, and the likes?
Okay, so the project, as I understand it, has to do with mini grids across different states in the country, and we are mostly targeted at rural community. And for a fact, Nigeria has one of the lowest rural community access in Africa, if not in the world. About 90 million Nigerians are still without electricity as of today, and many of those people live in the rural community. So, and what that means is that low growth, low production, low economic development. And so, if you have a pledge of $400 million for renewable energy, what you should be thinking about is how to accelerate, how to ensure that the project are being expedited, and there is no room for bottleneck, right? So it also means, giving to the most competent bidders, in the space, the players that are in the space that can ensure service, competent and efficient service delivery, making sure that they are the one that are on board. And so I don't have to mention it. I don't want to give any free advert, but I feel that there are many competent players in Nigeria renewable space that the government, of course, they might have them in mind also. That the government have been thinking about, like, okay, fine, we can work with these guys, work with that guys at different country, different state, different region to help deliver the service. Because if that happens, it will target the SMEs that you talked about. It will target the small businesses, target the homes, the hospitals. I read a report recently that Nigeria is planning a 400 million investment that targeted at varsities as universities across the country to also help, research and things like that. The problem with Nigeria economy at large, to an extent, is electricity, is energy. Our energy consumption as a country of 200 million people is still very, very low. Kenya has about 14,000 megawatts. South Africa has about 50,000 megawatts. Nigeria has just 5,000. Or maybe if you put all the alternative electricity put together, maybe 7,000 megawatts, in use. That is very, very low compared to other countries across Africa that are driving industrialization. So what would happen is remove bottleneck, ensure that projects are being facilitated so they don't just stay on paper, and looking for the right competent service providers that can ensure that service delivery is on time. Another thing is that having the right contract that emphasize and enhance timeline. So timeline is very, very important. How long will it take you to scale up this energy project? How many people is it going to reach? How long how much will the cost be? How much will be the upfront payment and things like that. So these are the intricate details of how to ensure that these things are done properly. It has to do with political commitment and determination at the end of the day. So those are the things that the government needs to consider.
Ademola, Managing Editor at Energy in Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, this has been The Big Story right here on the BDTV Breakfast Show. Up next is Social Listening. Do stay with us.